So welcome everyone to the webinar, Fueling Growth in Uncertain Times, Making Innovation a Team Sport. My name is Michelle Moore and I'm the Managing Director at Horn. For those of you who might not be familiar with Horn, we are a boutique learning and performance company. We're located in Toronto, but we work globally. And we provide our clients with transformative organizational solutions and unforgettable personal learning that profoundly shifts how people think, work, and lead. And we better customize our solutions. That's kind of our tagline. Joining me today is Dr. Gorkan Ahmetoglu, and Gorkan is a little bit under the weather, so we're gonna try and save his voice and his energy for some specific times. But Gorkan is the co-founder of Meta Profiling, no relation to Facebook, now known as Meta. It stands for actually My Entrepreneurial Talent Assessment. And Gorkan is also an associate professor of business psychology at the University College of London. And as I said, Gorkan's under the weather, so we're gonna try and not make him talk too much, but we're gonna bring him in on the slides where he has lots of value to add and can bring some color to it. So thank you, Gorkan, for being a trooper, being here while you're not well, and for joining us. And we look forward to having you weigh in a few minutes.
Yeah, big pleasure. Big pleasure. And I should also add that we came before Meta with the name. So
yeah, okay, exactly.
Yeah.
It is true. I remember when they changed their name, I was like, "Oh, this is not good." So because there is a meta profiling out there, and I've been fortunate enough to be working with meta profiling on and off in different projects for about a decade now, and it was exciting. And we'll talk more about how I found you. Just to let everybody know, this webinar is being recorded. We are going to try to make it as interactive as possible, so there will be some polls. We've got a Q&A where you can add your questions, and we will try to answer them at the end. And for those of you who do want a copy of the recording or the slides, I'll give you some information about who you can reach out to at the end to get those as well. So let's dive in and talk a little bit about what's going on and how it's impacting the ability to innovate and deliver new sources of value in the business environment. So we know certainly that organizations are dealing with a whole bunch of headwinds from a macro trend perspective. So we've got the geopolitical tensions, we've got the new world of work that is profoundly changing how things are done. We've got continued tech and supply chain disruptions, changing consumer behaviors, and of course, climate change being a top priority for many organizations. And then of course, we've got the uncertainty that comes with our high inflation, the rising interest rates, although they, in Canada at least, seem to be a little bit stable and maybe a little bit on the decline for some mortgage rates. And this looming, are we going to have a recession? Are we not going to have a recession? And if we do, what type of landing are we going to have? And what happens in these conditions is we see organizations respond in certain ways. And I spent a number of years at an organization that did career transition, so outplacement services, and we saw this every economic cycle. So things start to get uncertain and organizations go into cost-cutting mode. They do their downsizing and they decrease the risk that they have for starting new initiatives and investing in new things. And of course, that leads to a steep decline in innovation. Now, all of the research that I've seen shows that organizations who do this actually end up hurting themselves both in the short term and in the long term. And I'm going to give you some stats in a few slides that will build on that. But it's just a natural response that organizations have. And really what our premise is, or our hypothesis is that this is the time, in fact, to invest more in innovation and the talent required to actually fuel that innovation, because that's really critical. So we're going to dive into what we actually mean by innovation, because I think that's the first mistake that organizations make. I hear lots of CEOs talking about, oh, this innovation, and I think that's not really innovation. And then we're going to bring in talent as an enabler, and this is where we'll get Gorkan to weigh in with his voice that he's got left to share with us how you can actually spot the talent that can actually help you accelerate innovation. And then I'll close up by talking about, once you have that talent in place, either through acquisition or developing the competencies, how do you make sure that they're set up for success? Because there can be some barriers, even when you've got highly innovative people in your organization, to actually getting things done. So we want to make sure that we avoid those. So starting with what innovation is, and for those of you who are interested in the topic, I would highly recommend following Boston Consulting Group. They do an annual survey and a study on innovation. I'm waiting for the 2022 to come out. Last year, 2021 came out on April 15th. So every day I check my email to see what's happened. I go to their site. But last year, it was interesting in the study that they released, they found of the 1,600 companies they surveyed, 75% of them had innovation as one of their top 3 initiatives. But in that same study, they found that only 20% of them were actually ready to scale innovation in a broad and efficient way. And that's, I think, because a lot of people and organizations really don't understand what true innovation is. So let's kind of walk through what we mean by that. So I mentioned, I talk to a lot of CEOs, a lot of business leaders, and they tell me about the things that they're working on. And really what they're describing to me is continuous innovation. Continuous improvement. So continuous improvement, think that this is doing what you already do, but better. So imagine you've got your smartphone, every new release, the camera gets better and better, but it's still a camera. Yes, it takes better pictures. That's continuous improvement. Whereas innovation is something that delivers a new source of business value. So something that you never did before that unlocks business value. And the input to that innovation is creativity. And this is where, again, I talk to a lot of CEOs and they say innovation should be organic. It should just bubble up. Creativity is organic and bubbles up, but innovation, in fact, needs a process to really take that value from the creative ideas, so those new and different, unexpected ideas, and put them into a process and to really to capitalize on the value that they can bring. So innovation is new sources of business value through unexpected ideas, and there can be different levels of innovation that actually happen within an organization. So we start with incremental, and these are small. So this is really stuff that happens in your organization. So think new processes, but it is very closely akin to continuous improvement, but again, creates a little bit more value. So think about, through the pandemic, we've seen a lot of continuous improvement in Zoom and Microsoft Teams and all of the communication and collaboration technologies. And a lot of it is that continuous improvement, but we've seen some innovation as well. So as an example, putting in artificial intelligence so that you can translate slides into any language, bringing in artificial intelligence into products like Microsoft has something called Viva Sales, where the AI will actually analyze a meeting, take those notes and put them into your CRM for you. So those are new sources of business value, creates better productivity for the salespeople and allows them to spend more time with clients as opposed to doing administrative things. So that's incremental. We've seen it as well in travel. I had the chance to go to the United States for the first time in a few years, and my goodness, they've done some good continuous improvement with getting a QR code and zipping through the U.S. customs if you don't have Nexus. But in the States, of course, they have true innovation with something like Clear that actually is retina scanning and allows you to travel more efficiently. When it comes to breakthrough, these are innovations that change full industries. So think Airbnb changing how people travel and where they stay. Uber, again, how they travel and get from place to place. And probably the one that we're on the cusp of in this breakthrough is the health tech, so personal health care. So I've got my Fitbit on my wrist, I can take my data, I've got my DNA downloaded, I can upload it and see what all my genetic predispositions are. So we're really going to see, I think, a lot in healthcare coming. And then there's transformational innovation, which of course, the smartphone, regardless of the brand, changed the way that we all do things, completely transformational. And I think we're really at that cusp where we're going to start to see AI, which has been around since the 60s. It's not anything new, but we are at that place now with things like ChatGPT and generative AI, where we are about to see this next revolution of digital transformation take place. And it'll probably transform the way that everybody works and lives. And do things. So think about innovation. We've got different levels. And of course, what we want to do is make sure that it's a mature business capability. And this is something that Gartner put out probably about 10 years ago, actually. And they started to look at how mature is innovation in many organizations. And the answer was not very mature. But by 2027, they anticipate that it is going to be something that is a core business capability. So something that is repeatable, that people measure and have good rigor in place to make sure that it works. And this is a maturity model scale that we use to assess our clients and where they are with innovation. And a lot of them are really down at the level 2 where innovation does occur at some business function level, but the processes and results are inconsistent. What we're going to start to see is organizations really putting the right processes in place, technology to support it, to get to that, maybe that level 4. And this is important, and we're going to bring in the talk about people in a few minutes and talk about how the people are really going to be the fuel to that innovation, which will be very, very exciting. So in order to get to that level 4 maturity, what we do need is to make sure that process is in place. So first of all, you have to have a way to set your strategy, and make sure you know, when we talk about incremental, breakthrough, or transformational, how much time you want to spend on each of those different buckets. And many organizations spend 85% of their time working on incremental. You have to have a way to generate and select experiments, because this is the really critical piece. You've got to keep your innovation engine fueled. And we know that research shows us about 7 out of 10 innovation ideas actually don't work. They're not going to be able to deliver the value that you anticipate within the timeframes and the cost. And so you kill them. You got to have something to go to next, and not have your bucket empty. So you have to have that way to generate, select the ideas, and then rapidly design and develop to get them to a place where you can launch even a minimum viable product, measure the success, get feedback, iterate, try to get some of that business value as quickly as possible from your innovation, and either stop it then, or if it's working, transfer it back to your core portfolio. And this is, again, where many organizations have challenges. And you think of a lot of companies who have started their innovation hubs on the side. So they've got a mature business that's been around for decades and 100 years, whatever it is, and we have a certain way of doing things, and they want to innovate by starting this little accelerator hub on the side, and they come up with some great ideas, but when they try to move that idea back into that old, slow, bureaucratic organization, they have trouble. So there has to be a way to integrate kind of those cool ideas that you've got into a more mature business, if that's the situation that you're in. Of course, startups can do this pretty easily, but it's the incumbents, the people with lots of history that struggle. So we want to do a little bit of a poll and hear from you. So innovation is important. We know during downturns, many organizations turn away from it, which we think is a mistake. And I'm going to show you in a minute some stats that show you why. But love to hear from you. What is your organization's current level of commitment to innovation right now? So Dee, if you can launch the poll for us, that would be great. And we'll get people to lock in their votes. That would be wonderful. And just while we're doing that, I can talk a little bit about some of the stats while we're waiting for the answers to come in that show why innovating through these uncertain times is so critical. So this comes from McKinsey, and it's a study that was called Innovation in a Crisis. You can Google it and read the whole thing. And what they found was organizations that actually invested in innovation during a crisis actually outperformed others during the crisis by 10%. So these were all companies that were publicly traded and tracked. But they also, over the long term, in post-crisis years, tend to outperform the market by 30%. So that's pretty significant. And that's, I think, where you start to see that kind of first to market advantage of things. So being first is critical, being early is critical. And we know that performing during that crisis is also, or innovating during the crisis is also going to help you. All right, so let's see. Dee, I don't know, I can't see the poll results. Oh, there they are. Okay, they've popped up. So let's see, we've got some level of investment for about 27% of people. Same level of investment as usual, we've got 7%, and we've turned up the focus and commitment. We love to see that. So 67% of you have turned up the focus and commitment. So that's great to hear. You'll see that you're going to have some advantage from that. So good to hear it. And now we want to talk a little bit about how you can make sure you've got the right people then to really take advantage of it, because we know that people are actually the fuel for innovation. So let's, I'm going to bring in Gorkan in a minute. He's been resting his voice, having his water. And thank you, Gorkan, for being here. But we want to talk about talent as that fuel. So again, when we talk about business capabilities, it's a bit of a formula. You have to have the right processes. You have to have technology to support it. But you need the right people as well, and whether it's roles or competencies, it becomes critical. And talent is what fuels innovation. And I often talk about a spectrum of innovative talent because not all innovators are creative equally. So I think, at one end we've got, I call them inventors. So these are the people who can come up with a good idea. So my kids laugh at me all the time because I'll come home and I'll say, I thought of a great idea for an app. And they'll think, okay, that's great, Mom. That's a crazy idea. You're never going to do anything with it. So there's lots of people who do that, who see, we should do this. I kick myself because honestly, I remember even when this happened, probably in 2013, I was sitting at my dining room table and I was working on something for a client, and it was around virtual team collaboration. And I was Googling, are there any good online team building activities for virtual teams? And there weren't. And I thought I should really get into this. And I didn't. And then of course, pandemic comes along and I was too late to the game then, but that's the inventor side. So then we've got the entrepreneurs. So those are the inventors who can actually do things with their ideas. So I wish I'd made that shift over to entrepreneur with my virtual team building activities. But entrepreneurs can actually take those ideas and put them into play to start to get some of that value from it. But often entrepreneurs, and Gorkan's going to be able to talk a lot about this, some of them can't work necessarily well within organizations that have policies and constraints and processes and bureaucracy, and they're slow to get things done. And that's where disruptive talent really comes in. And I first came across Meta back in 2011 when I was developing a business IT alignment program for the Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy Group, LVMH. And we had their IT high potentials and senior leaders coming through. And the idea was we wanted the program to help those IT leaders deliver more business value. So this is about 11 years ago. And I came across Meta, my entrepreneurial talent assessment. And I thought, well, this would be great to put these IT people through this to show whether or not they've got the competencies required to drive innovation and deliver that business value by being innovative. And so I started working with Meta, and they've subsequently come up with another version called Disruptive Talent. But Gorkan, would love to have you tell us a little bit about the evolution of the assessment that you've got, and how it started and where it's at now, and what you see people doing with it. So thank you, and feel free to keep drinking your water if you need to.
Yeah. No, it's great to hear your presentation so far. And really, I'm as you know, Michelle, I'm an organizational psychologist. I'm interested in people, and when we started this back in 2009, so we're almost, we've been researching disruptive talent now for 15 years almost. Next year it's going to be 15 years. But yeah, when we started looking at it, we wanted to understand how we can, whether there is some sort of assessment that would be able to capture who is entrepreneurial within organizations, and who will therefore be able to innovate more effectively. And there was very little there. And there was very little in terms of understanding what is entrepreneurial and what is disruptive. And then how do you actually know who is a disruptive talent? So we started looking at that 15 years ago, and we've done a lot of research on it. We've worked with a lot of organizations. There, my voice is starting to go. And yeah, so this is, I guess the tool here is, I guess the key thing here to understand it is, it's a tool to measure someone's potential to recognize valuable opportunities within organizations, but also to exploit those valuable opportunities within organizations. But it's not just a theory in a sense, it's what we've shown that, disruptive talents actually do. So we have studies with, hundreds of thousands of people now within organizations looking at it. And just as an example of something we did a couple of years ago with 155,000 people across 50 different nations. And we looked at people who were high on the disruptive talent scale and compared them to people who were low on the disruptive talent scale. And found that those who were high on the scale were 250% more likely to innovate than those who were low on the scale. So, bottom line is, and we have plenty of studies that kind of replicates that in different, obviously, contexts, industries, etc. So it is very true that people who are disruptive are also enablers of innovation within organizations. It's not just a theory that we have. And then the question is, well, what is it about those people that enables them to innovate, right? And you can look at the characteristics really to understand what happens when individuals are able to do this, are able to actually bring innovation. And I can tell you how we measured innovation. It's whether people bring in new business, significant value to the organization, new products, new services. They change, they bring in new methods for doing things that change how organizations do things and solve long-standing organizational problems. So all of these things are what increases the more someone is disruptive in terms of their personal makeup, let's say.
I would love to hear a little bit more about the competencies and these characteristics. And one of the questions, maybe you could talk to this as well, is, are people born or can you develop these? And I know what I say as a learning and development professional, but would love to hear a little bit more about some of these, because some of them seem counterintuitive for me as well.
Look, we have lots of research on all of these questions, and I think this is probably what distinguishes, at least from what I've seen and what's out in the industry, this tool from other tools. Most of these questions that you can ask, we have some research to show what the answer is, rather than, that's just my opinion. But anyway, but we can start with, let me just answer your question first on the nature versus nurture bit. We have some interesting evidence to show. I mean, look, when it comes to these traits or talents that we're talking about, it is always a bit of both. I mean, people don't like to hear that, but generally what we tend to see is that this is pretty stable. So we have 8 years of testing. So people tested in 2011, retested in, let's say, 2013, and then 2016, and then 2000. So 8 years, difference in the testing, and we see on a 0.7 correlation, which means it's really stable. So they score almost the same. So the question is, it doesn't answer the question, is it inborn, but it does say that it's pretty stable, that people don't change automatically if you don't do anything about it. And here comes the other bit, because we generally know that we've done some brain studies where we look at brain activity of entrepreneurial people, disruptive talent versus non-disruptive talent, and we see differences there. So there's clearly some biological element to this. But it's not 100% biological, right? So the biological would go maximum 50%, which means there's still quite a lot of room to improve your talent and to change yourselves with systematic intervention. It's just not going to be that simple, right? It's not going to be, let's do a one-day workshop on how to become more inventive or innovative. And then you become more. It's very unlikely to work with a one-day workshop, but systematic effort, long-term effort to change it, you probably can become more disruptive, more entrepreneurial in nature.
And I totally agree with that, especially some of them, I look at them, some of them are easier from my perspective to develop than others, but often, when we're working with people, they say, oh, I'm not creative. Okay, well, we can teach you a process to generate more creative ideas, right? And if you can follow a process, you can be creative, and it actually works. Curiosity, a little harder to develop, but we've done some work around, taking the science from competency scales, right? Of I'm just interested in it. I ask questions. I go beyond and do research, right? And showing people what level curiosity looks like, and how you can put some of that into play. Now, some of the other stuff, it's maybe a little bit harder to develop, but for sure, I think a lot of these can be developed, and so organizations can be looking to either hire people that have these, but you can also be developing your people internally for some of these.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm incidentally writing a book on it. I know I haven't mentioned
Oh,
this to you, but yeah, I'm
oh,
writing a book, which is, I'm not sure about the title yet, but working title is The Talent Test.
oh,
But
interesting.
it
Yeah,
is about entrepreneurial talent, disruptive
yeah,
talent, and I will dedicate a couple of chapters on how to develop it. So I do believe
yeah,
in
that's great. Yeah,
being able to develop this stuff. Uh,
excellent.
but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, just looking at the traits, and it kind of gives you a bit more understanding as to why these people are, are the ones that are generators of innovation where others are not, right? I mean, you
Mhm.
mentioned the inventor type, if you like,
Yes. Yeah.
which is people who have, people. I'm similar. I have lots of ideas, and then I don't do too
Yeah.
much about it. I mean, that's why I'm an academic rather than a
Yes.
multimillionaire
Yeah.
entrepreneur, right? So um but what we see is that what we find is that most people have ideas, but they're not great ideas, right? So
Right.
so you
Yeah.
might have had your app idea, or I can't
Hmm.
remember what you said about the other thing, but you
Yeah.
you had a couple of ideas, but
Yes.
generally you stop even before you evaluate how realistic, how profitable, how valuable that idea is, and how many people can come in and compete, right? So this is what
Yes. Yes.
most people do. People
Yeah.
have shallow level ideas
Yeah.
without, so real ideas, really valuable ideas, comes from a lot of work, a lot of thinking about the idea, a lot of
Hmm.
connections to be made, a lot of research to be done, whether that's networking or kind of other types of research. And that, that's curiosity,
Yes.
but that's also sort of persistence to find out more. So that's
Yeah.
really sort of high level of curiosity where you're not satisfied with the first kind of idea. So you need
Exactly.
quite a lot of knowledge about something
Yeah.
for you to have a good idea. It's very unlikely that you will have a good idea about something you don't know that much,
Yes.
and then but you happen to have an idea that no one in the field thought about. It's like,
Yeah.
that's so unlikely.
Hmm.
So these disruptive talent are people who go in and do their research and drop ideas that they find quickly aren't very valuable, but the
Yeah.
ones that they think have some legs potentially, they will go and find out more about. So
Yes.
so they will have quite a lot of understanding about an idea before they propose it, and generally that leads to better ideas. But they also have more ideas, incidentally, right? So you would
Yes.
think you have a lot of ideas, but I can guarantee you that really disruptive people will have tenfolds the number of ideas
Yeah.
you would have, right? So that,
Yeah.
or a regular person. I'm not kind of
Yes.
saying that you are not disruptive, but sorry,
Well,
but it
I'll
does
tell
sound a
you,
bit like.
my kids, because I always like, oh, this is a good idea, this is a good idea, and then we'll be driving and I'll say, oh, I wonder what that person's doing. They're like, you're nosy, and I say, no, I'm curious, I want to understand everything.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So
Yeah, but I mean, Elon Musk said like he had millions of ideas in his head at
yes.
like almost every day. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of,
Wow,
that's
okay,
the
that sounds
level you need to think
exhausting.
about,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, exactly. So it's not always nice to be in those shoes,
Yes.
but
Yes.
anyway, yeah, and then it's, the execution bit, as you mentioned. Again, this is just not a natural proclivity to
Hmm.
have, to
Yeah.
actually do something about an
Yeah.
idea, because it's so much risk involved, and most people are not
Yes.
risk taking. So
Yeah.
what disruptive talents are actually people who have a lot of courage to do
Hmm.
things, right? But they're
Hmm.
also quite action oriented, so they don't
Hmm.
leave things to the next day. If they have an idea, they will test it straight away, right? Again, it's a very it's almost a natural tendency. So most
Yes.
people will like to procrastinate a bit. Most
Yeah.
people are just kind of happy with the way things are, right? Challenging the status quo is not a normal thing to do, right? Like you're
Yes. Yeah.
supposed to be
Yeah.
sort of going with the status quo, because
Hmm.
that's how systems work.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the disruptive talents are those who are able or have that tendency to do
Yeah.
that. um, we have actually some research from Brazil that looks at very high impact, highly successful entrepreneurs,
Hmm.
and comparing them. These are business founders, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So we compared sort of the regular average entrepreneur in Brazil to, and this is across 50 different cities or 40 different cities, and really, really high impact ones, multimillionaires,
Yeah.
millions in revenues, growth in the 20s and 20-30%,
Yeah.
and found that the number one predictor of their success is proactivity. So if you
Oh,
are sort
interesting.
of
Yeah.
just average proactivity, your
Yeah.
chances of being a high impact entrepreneur is basically nil. Like,
Yeah.
you need to have at least above average, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
to even have a chance.
Yeah.
Um, um, so anyway, that I'm
Yeah.
just sort
Interesting.
of
Yeah.
describing
Yes.
why it is that disruptive talent is leading to these things, because it's actually, there are not that many people like that in the first
Yeah.
place, right? So those
For
people are
sure.
the ones that lead to
Yeah.
innovation. And finally, we have this kind of leadership aspect of it, the ability to get others on board in your vision, but also to have I'm talking a lot now. Stop me if sort of I'm
No,
going.
no, no. Yeah, that's all good.
But yeah, I'm just going to cover the last bit, which is,
Yeah.
I
And then we
think,
can
the
get to the
core.
derailers, the juicy part.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's when I need to sort of take a step back and just sort of rest a bit. But
Yes.
yeah, I think vision is key here. So vision is essentially, it might sound sort of, the label might sort of mislead, but it's a bit like ambition, but it's one type of ambition to look beyond making money, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And it's not altruistic either in terms of
Mhm.
just helping the poor, but it's a vision to make impact,
Mhm.
to get more, as many people as possible, something valuable product. So if you
Yeah.
hear very sort of well-known entrepreneurs like
Mhm.
Elon Musk, like Steve Jobs,
Yeah.
like Jeff Bezos, it's rarely about the money. I mean, if it was, they would have stopped a long time ago, right? So
Yeah.
their true vision is something bigger. It's to create value, and that kind of vision focuses people, right? So it doesn't
Yes.
distract you, and you really need to be focused to innovate, to have transformative or breakthrough innovations. You
Mhm.
really need to be focused, because there's so many things that could distract you. So that
Yeah.
vision, that sort of navigates you at all times is critical, right?
Yes.
And that's what disruptive talent also have, which is again a unique thing. uh,
Yes.
and obviously, authority and stability is those things that is able to get other people on board, is to be
Yes.
able to communicate that
Yeah.
vision in a way that other people believe in it, and it's to have the resilience and stability to be able to
Mhm.
lead those people in the long
Yeah.
term, right?
Yeah. For
Okay,
sure.
I'll stop there, but you
Yeah.
get the picture as to why our
For sure.
results, as
Yes.
to the empirical results we get. There is a sort of solid theory to support why that would be the case.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then the other thing I found really interesting about the disruptive talent was you've got this set of characteristics, but there are things that will derail you as well, right? Like the hubris, being mercurial or too dominant. Um, and it was funny. I thought I made the best joke ever. I was talking once at a conference and I was sharing some of this information, and they said, well, someone in the audience said, well, what do you do if you have someone like this? And I said, well, don't give them a Twitter account. That's the worst thing that you can ever do. But so we want to stay away from these characteristics, right? Because
Yeah.
it's see, and you thought it was funny too. I also thought it was pretty
Yeah,
funny.
no, it's definitely funny. I don't know
So,
when you did it, but
it
it's
was
definitely
probably
funny.
2018,
Okay,
2019.
so it's funnier now,
Funnier
I would
then.
say.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was funny
Uh,
then too. Yeah. So,
yeah, yeah.
but it is true, right? Because there are people that have some of those characteristics, but some of these derailers, and this is what really, I mean, it's you said like the vision, the not necessarily altruistic, but wanting the good. If you're just doing it for yourself, it's not going to work. But so that arrogance, being too, this is the way that we have to do it, or dominant, it's gonna really get in the way as well. So I love this assessment. I think it's great, and so thank you for using your energy. And we're going to let you get off the call soon, so you can get back to resting. But really appreciate that. And we do have a question in the Q&A that talks about the role of the environment for disruptive talent. And so let me take us into that next section, because it is actually, I think, really important. And I've talked to lots of people who, consider themselves, we'll call them small d disruptive talent, not the big D changed the world, but small d. And sometimes they go into organizations and it doesn't work, and it doesn't work for a variety of reasons. So first of all, I say for disruptive talent to really harness the potential of them, you need organizational commitment and you need readiness in the organization. And if you don't have those two things, you have to think really smartly about how you're going to leverage people who do have these tendencies. So when I talk about organizational commitment, it starts with executive sponsorship, and this comes back again to, your innovation process. Do you have someone at the C level who says that we are going to be innovative? And do you have funding for those ideas? Because again, I talk to many organizations who say, oh yeah, we want to drive innovation. Oh, but we kind of do it off the side of our desk, and we don't really have money for it. So can you do it for free? So this is commitment. You've got someone leading it at the C level, and you've got money to put towards it. It doesn't have to be a lot of money, but you've got some money. And then from a readiness perspective, there's a whole bunch of things that we want to look at. So culturally, right? Like what is your culture ready for this? Do you have a culture that it's okay to take risks? Is there that psychological safety? Do you have your process? Do you have technology to support it? Because technology can become a real hindrance to innovation. And not to get too deep into the weeds from a technology perspective, but big organizations that have complex, what we call enterprise architectures or technology setups, it's really hard for them to bring in a new technology and have it fit in that big machine with, think of it like spaghetti noodles that are connected all over the place with different pipes and things like that. It can be really hard. So if your architecture from a technology perspective is not ready for innovation, it can slow you down. And if you don't have technology to kind of take your ideas in and vote on them and all of those types of things, so crowdsource and assess, that can also be a problem. The strength of your innovation ecosystem. So we know a lot of the best innovators, they don't do it themselves. They have partners, and whether it's academics like Gorkan and his colleagues who work on this, smaller startups. We've seen a lot in Canada of banks who will actually incubate startups, because if you think of it, a small startup with a cool technology, they've got a cool technology. The big banks have lots of clients, but not cool technology. It's a match made in heaven. So bringing those ecosystem partners in really can help. And then alignment of rewards, because I see it over and over again. Most people are not incented nor rewarded for failure. And with innovation, again, 7 out of 10 innovations aren't going to work. So you can't be punishing people for this. So this becomes super, super critical. And so what I tell the clients that I work with is, if you're assessing yourself on this readiness and commitment side, and you find that you're low on both of those, it's not the time to hire a permanent role and bring someone into your organization to be that disruptive talent. I've heard stories. I've talked to people who have been brought into big companies as disruptive talent, and they get there and it's like the salmon trying to swim upstream, and everything is so difficult that they usually end up leaving. So low readiness, low commitment. Start by getting an advisory board or a group of people together just to help you with some idea generation. So people who think differently. And when we teach about creativity and crowdsourcing, we tell people, often when we have a problem as a business person, we'll go to people who have interest or knowledge about our problem, and we want them to be sage and give us advice. Where actually the best ideas will come from, sometimes, usually I'll say, is if you go to people who have no interest and no knowledge of your problem that you're trying to solve, because they're not constrained in their thinking. So they won't be the ones coming with, oh, well, this won't work because of this reason, or you know what, we've tried that before, or it's not invented here, so it's not going to happen. So low readiness, low commitment. Start with either an advisory board or just a group of people who can feed you ideas that maybe start to push you a little bit on that innovation spectrum. You could also do an interim assignment. So not hiring a full-time role, but maybe bringing someone in for a 6-month trial to see how it works. Or if you feel that you're ready, this is when you bring in the permanent role. When I used to work at the last company I was at, when I first got there, I led the Executive Career Solutions Group. So we helped CEOs and senior vice presidents going through outplacement. And there was one woman who, she had moved from one of the Canadian banks to another, and they brought her in to disrupt. And she left after, I think it was maybe not even 8 months. And she said to me, I wish I had talked to you before, because I would have really asked different questions about the readiness of this organization before going in, because they just weren't ready. So to the question in the Q&A, the environment is important and we have to think about it. So let's get you to talk about, how your organization is maybe leveraging disruptive talent if they are. Do you have, just a pool of people you go to that are outside of your company for idea generation? Have you formed that advisory board, again, external, or are you using interim or full-time roles? So Dee, if you can launch the poll for us, that would be great. And while we're collecting the answers, I can tell you about some of the things that we talk to our clients about to make sure that the disruptive talent are fully supported. So the first thing is, again, an executive sponsor. So your innovation side of things needs someone leading the charge and an executive sponsor, but your person that you bring in, if you're bringing in, one specific person to drive disruption, they also need that executive sponsor who they're connected to. And give them a peer mentor as well, especially if they're coming from outside of the organization, because these are people who are probably going to try to, they're going to come up with different ideas than you've heard of before. They're going to need to push them forward and still cooperate with others. And the peer mentor can really be helpful in helping them navigate kind of those below the waterline, if you think of the iceberg analogy of how things really get done here, not what's documented and on the screen. So that peer mentor can be helpful. They should also have management support, manager support. So I have worked with some managers and we've coached some managers who would not do well with a disruptive talent person on their team because they like to be the star. And when you bring in disruptive talent, if they do well, they often become the star. So you need a manager who's humble enough to, and one who really has that mindset that they're only as good as their team and they don't need to be kind of the superstar on stage. Give them a chance to connect to other disruptors, because there's nothing worse than feeling like you're the only person that thinks this way and everybody else is different. Make sure that they've got frequent feedback and give them a coach, right? Because it can be challenging, especially if you're bringing them in at a really senior level, giving them an executive coach to help them navigate some of the roadblocks and landmines that they will undoubtedly come up against, I think can be really, really helpful. So this is more looking at, one-on-one. If you've got one disruptor you're bringing in, of course, the idea is that you want to have lots of disruptors because we want to make sure we've got disruptive talent throughout the organization. So let's see, Dee, do we have the poll results? Let's see, here we go. Okay, so we have idea generation. So we've got 13% of people using outside sources for idea generation. We've got 13% with advisory board and 13% with interim roles. That's great. And we've got 25% who are using full-time people. And oh my goodness, 38% none of the above. So we've got some ideas hopefully from the webinar and how you can start to engage even if your organization is not ready for it. So Gorkan, I'm not sure if you're up to if any comments that you want to make on this environmental side, because we did have someone ask about that and we've had some chat on it, but if you've got anything to add.
We've done some research on it, and so there are two pieces of research that I can talk to that sort of answer that question. I mean, first of all, we do see that on average, people who are disruptive will be more likely to innovate, but there is also a different, so environment does play a role. We can see it even in industries. So some industries will have far less of that effect. So disruptive talent in law, for instance, generate very little innovation, right? Whereas in tech, they generate a lot of innovation. So it kind of goes like the relationship between how disruptive you are and how much innovation you will generate kind of depends on which industry you're in.
Is that because of regulatory constraints and that type of thing, or do you think?
I mean, I am not sure exactly. I think that's a theory, right? I don't know exactly what's going on in different industries, but you can just imagine that there is the regulatory element to it, and maybe certain kinds of people are attracted to those industries, which means they are the managers of those disruptive talents, right? So so environment clearly has an impact on how much innovation you will produce. Generally, you will tend to disruptive talents will produce innovation, but but yeah, it depends on how much the environment supports that, right? To what extent that talent will be manifested depends on the environment. The other interesting thing is that that we see is this on engagement. So would you think that disruptive talent is more engaged when they work within the confines of organizations, or less engaged, let's say, compared to if they were on their own? It's kind of like you could have both ways, right? You would say, well, entrepreneurs, they're not very happy within organizations. Actually, what we find is that disruptive talent are more engaged than the regular employee, which is quite counterintuitive, right?
It is.
It is counterintuitive, but all the traits that I mentioned that are, I mean, it's a complex thing, because engagement is 50% down to your character.
Yes.
A lot of people think that engagement is about what the organization gives you. No, it's actually half of it is about how you see the world.
Yes.
What you focus on. Do you see the glass as half empty or half full, right? A lot down to you. And the same traits that sort of help people to innovate are the same traits that also keep people optimistic and engaged. But here's the interesting thing. Our research shows that, so even though you're more, if you're disruptive, you're more likely to be engaged than other employees. That doesn't mean that, that's just relatively speaking, right? You can still be disengaged. If you have a terrible manager, you can be more engaged than others, but still disengaged. You're just slightly less disengaged than other employees, right?
Yeah.
And so we looked at, okay, so if who is more likely to quit if they are disengaged? Is it disruptive talents or is it regular employees? So disruptive talents are more engaged than other employees, right?
Yeah.
But when they're disengaged, they're more likely to quit, even though they're more engaged than other employees, right? So that also sort of, that tells you, well, the environment, you really need to get the environment piece right, because getting people on board, it's basically just saying what you said with your story about, readiness. If you're not ready, not only are you potentially not getting any innovation from them, you're very likely to get people quitting. So that's a counterproductive strategy, right? So so the environment is really important from that perspective.
I had another client who, she landed a job with one of the large Canadian organizations as VP of Finance Innovation. And after she got there, she called me a few months in and she said, nobody is innovating. Like, nobody wants to cooperate. And I said, well, what's going on? And she said she had replaced someone and they had a new team because the last person in charge and the team had tried and it was a fairly big initiative, like 60 million Canadian dollars. And it failed and they fired everybody. So of course, nobody's going to want to innovate, right? So that's back to the environment, and, culture plays a huge role. And I do find that, many senior leaders in their head, they have, I've got tolerance for, a little bit of risk. And then when it comes down to it, the things like their reputational risk and, sunk cost fallacy and all that stuff really get in the way of them making good decisions. So that's great. So thank you, Gorkan, and again, thank you for joining us. I will see if there's any other questions. If anyone has questions for us, you can please pop them into the chat. I do see another comment that says that when your company's not ready, and then you lose the punch when you're trying to relaunch. Yeah, for sure. It can be hard, right? Like if you have a false start where, we tried it once and it didn't work, it can be challenging. And so, focusing on what's different this time and, really telling that different stories so that people buy in can be, it can be a big roadblock, but not insurmountable. So I've seen organizations do this effectively where they, just put the elephant in the room out on the table and they say, listen, we did this before, we did a bad job. And Europeans are actually better at this than North Americans. I remember when I first moved to Europe and I went to Netherlands and they said, this is Michelle. She's come to help us because we did a really bad job and she's going to make sure we do a good job. North Americans not so good at admitting that, but calling it out, right? We tried this before. The conditions were different. Here's the reasons why it didn't work. Here's how we're going to do things differently next time. It can help, but it's there's no question it's hard if you have had that false start and it didn't work out. All right, so what do you do when just a few in leadership support and the rest are disengaged? So I'm assuming that means support innovation or using disruptive talent and the rest are disengaged. Um, that's a hard one again, right? It's you got to make sure you've got that one executive sponsor and figure out how they can influence or how they can get others influencing in. I find business cases and data works with leadership as well, right? So bringing some of the facts to them. But it's hard if you've got the kind of the naysayers and the cultural. So I don't know, Garkin, if you've got any thoughts on that. So when a few in leadership support and the rest are disengaged, how you can
Yeah,
overcome that.
it's not impossible, I think,
Yeah.
if you can create a climate which is a smaller team and a smaller set of resources to get disruptive talent to innovate. I mean, we have so a study we did, which was really interesting, showed that when you get when you give people a kind of a culture of innovation, so when the culture of the organization is really innovative, what happens is not that everyone becomes more innovative suddenly.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, when the culture of the company is more innovative, the company is more innovative as a
Right.
whole, right?
Yeah.
So I think even double or 2.5 times more innovative.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but the interesting thing is that's not because everyone in the company suddenly becomes more innovative, or
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
or like every employee becomes 2.5 times more innovative.
Yeah.
What we
No.
find is that actually most employees' innovation remains pretty static.
Yes.
When you have an organizational culture which allows for innovation or supports innovation, it is the disruptive talent that become 2 or 3 times more innovative, generate
Okay.
lots and lots of
Yeah.
innovation. So
Yeah.
very specific individuals within
Yes.
the organization generate most of the innovation for that organization, or at least
Yes.
lead it, right? You can't do it
Yeah.
alone, but you
Yeah.
lead that innovation. And so that also seemed to suggest that instead of targeting the whole organization, because you will any most of the people within the organization won't innovate anyway. If you
Yeah.
just kind of manage to create some sort of bubble
Yes.
of a culture, like
Yeah.
a climate where
Yeah.
you have the right disruptive talent in there, in
Yes.
theory that should still be able to generate lots of innovation for you.
Yeah. For
So
sure.
I do think it's possible, but you
Yeah.
have to be quite aware of what you need to
Yeah.
understand what you're doing. You can't just do this randomly,
For
so
for sure. Yeah.
but it's possible.
Yeah, and I think so. We call that, the two-speed business, right? Like you've got your 80% of your organization fueling the normal machine, keeping the lights on, and then you've got 20%, let's say, because I like the 80-20 rule, who are
Yeah,
more looking for the ideas, right? Because I don't think a whole organization of innovators. I think that'd be really hard, in fact, right? So because you need people working on the a little less boring, the boring stuff, right? The less sexy
yeah.
stuff.
I mean, we
So
again, I'm going to bring in some research here, but we actually do have some research to support that common sense claim.
yeah,
And we looked at teams essentially where we have lots of innovators,
yeah,
lots of disruptive talent in them,
yes.
and compared them to teams who have no disruptive talent in them, and teams who have a mixed bag of some people
Yeah,
who are not very disruptive and some people who are,
yeah,
and find that those teams who have lots of disruptive talent in them are no more innovative than those who have no disruptive talent.
yeah,
That's quite incredible. I
yes,
mean,
yeah, that
I
is,
don't know
yeah.
what happens in those teams that have lots of, I think they're just kind of arguing about which idea to
That's
pursue, right?
probably
So
it, right? It's true.
but
So,
we find that for every, I mean, the kind of best ratio, it seems, is for every disruptive talent that you have to have two who are not disruptive,
right,
who are
yeah,
kind of like
yeah,
just
that makes sense.
you
Yeah,
know yeah, on the opposite spectrum
yeah,
of the talent. So yeah, so
absolutely.
that certainly is what we find as well.
Yeah, good. Okay, and we've got one last question, then we're going to wrap up. So, what's the better approach, top to bottom or bottom to top for innovation? So, I'll take this one just from the pure sense that from an ideation perspective, it's both, and in fact, it's a third element which is outside in. So, there are different models for innovation. So you can do departments innovate. You can have one innovation department, but I know the research shows that organizations who get the majority of their people involved in ideation. So this doesn't mean they're working on the projects, but just a way to crowdsource ideas, actually perform better. And you also have to have your clients, right? So it's that outside in perspective. And that's what a lot of organizations forget. With innovation, we can't just do stuff to our clients. We want to do things for them, right? And that's the value piece of it. We don't want to be launching ideas that don't deliver value. So top down is good, bottom up is good, lateral is good, outside and in is good. But how you structure your innovation group then that works on these can be in different ways. And you know, it's kind of gone back and forth. I've seen research that said that you know, first it was, you know, divisional is good. And then it was like, well, no, one innovation group. And then it was having it on the side. But now they've said, you know, having your innovation hub on the side isn't actually the way to do that. It is better to integrate it into the organization. So we'll end it there. And Gorkan, thank you so much again for coming. I know it's terrible to have to do these things when you're not feeling well, but we applaud your your commitment and really appreciate your participation. So we'll leave it the call to action with the audience that, you know, to get started, to think about how mature is your innovation process. Look at some of those things that have to be in place. Do you have a way to find the ideas? Do you have criteria for selecting them? Can you accelerate through development, kill them as fast as possible if they're not going to work? And then look for ways to really start to improve that maturity. Think about who your disruptive talent are and what your strategy is. Do you want to bring people in from outside? Do you want to form those advisory groups, or just get an idea generation method going to crowdsource? There's lots of technology that allows you to crowdsource based on your readiness and your commitment. But then think about how you can develop some of the competencies in people, right? So I've been saying for at least 14 years, when people say, what's the number one thing I'd invest in for training? And I always say creativity, because up until now, it's been what we've been better at as humans. But now with some of the AI stuff, I'm starting to think, but I still think we are better at creativity. And so teaching people how to be creative, at least you'll get your idea pipeline full. And then, of course, align that talent acquisition and development process to make sure that you're investing it. So thank you for joining us. We're right at the top of the hour. Gorkan, again, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to speak with you again. And I can't wait to read your new book. So keep me posted on that, please.
I will do.
I'll look forward to it. And for those of you who are interested in getting a copy of the presentation, feel free to reach out to either Lynn Gallagher, who's our Senior Vice President of Client Partnerships, or Tim. You can scan the QR code as well to connect to Horn directly. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn and would be delighted to follow everyone. So thank you so much. And thank you, Dee, for being a wonderful producer for us. Have a great day, everyone, and take care.